Corey LaJoy suggests that John Nemechek might be a favorite to go to Stewart-Haas Racing in 2023. Denny Hamlin vouches that Jamie McMurray should be in a Fox Sports booth for the rest of the 2022 and 2023 season, and Billy Venturini and Drew Dollar have been getting into a beef over the last couple of days. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off with paint schemes and sponsorship news first. Let's jump into those really quickly. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Briscoe's 2022 Magical Vacation Planner scheme that we are going to see this weekend and a couple other races throughout the 2022 season. This paint scheme actually looks really cool in my opinion. I like that Chase Briscoe has a different sponsor that is willing to work with them. I think they're part of the Disney brand, if I'm not mistaken, so really cool to see that for sure, and glad to see that they're partnering up with Chase Briscoe this weekend. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Austin Center's 2022 Keystone Light scheme that we're going to see this weekend at the All-Star Race. I'm not as big of a fan of this Keystone Light scheme as the other Keystone Light scheme. I don't like the black and blue on it. The blue number is not a really thing I'm a big fan of, and I don't like the black as much. I rather have the other one, but I think it's cool they are changing up at the same token and same time. I'm not as big fan of this paint scheme. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeffrey Earnhardt's 2022 Forever Lawn scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This paint scheme is actually really cool in my opinion. I love it seeing that Forever Lawn always changes up their schemes. I think it looks really cool, and I'm glad we'll see it be seen out on the racetrack at Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Stephen Parsons' 2022 Marker Rebellion SoCal scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway in his first start with the organization. This paint scheme does look pretty decent in my opinion. I love the Marker Rebellion and SoCal are able to correspond together. I think it looks great, and I'm looking forward to seeing the racetrack this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kevin Harvick's 2022 Busch Bacon scheme that we're going to see this weekend in the All-Star Race. Of course, there's a Busch Bacon promo that's going to be going on this weekend. I think this paint scheme looks really great in my opinion. I love that Busch Beer and Busch Bacon are partnering up this weekend with the team. I think his paint scheme absolutely looks incredible and is done really well, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing on the racetrack here this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Eric Almirola's 2022 Smithfield Busch Bacon scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This is absolutely a killer-looking Busch Bacon scheme. Yes, Smithfield really is a majority of the car, but I really love the fact that Busch Bacon and them are partnering up on this car. I think it looks absolutely incredible and looks great, and I'm absolutely looking forward to see on the racetrack here this weekend at the All-Star Race. I think it looks great, to be honest with you. The next paint scheme we're going to take a look at is Ryan Ellis's 2022 Renaissance scheme that we're going to see later this year at Nashville. This paint scheme's all right in my opinion. I do love the fact that Ryan Ellis does have a different scheme every single week, it seems like, which is great for sponsorship and funding. When you have multiple sponsors that are funding to work with you, I think that's a great thing for the sport. So glad to see his paint scheme on the racetrack, and glad to see Renaissance is sponsoring Ryan Ellis. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2022 Kroger Viva scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Not as big of a fan of this scheme as the one Ryan Preece has had in the past. I just don't think the colors work really well together on this one. I'm not a big fan of this scheme, but it's good to see the sponsor willing to be loyal to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and JTG Doherty. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Larson's 2022 HenderCars.com patriotic scheme that we're going to see next weekend at the Coca-Cola 600. This is an absolutely killer patriotic scheme. One of my favorite patriotic schemes I think I've ever seen in NASCAR. Not only I think the stripes are in a perfect position, but the colors look great. And honestly, I'd like to see this car as a regular car the Hendrick uses. I think this looks absolutely amazing. I'm glad that Kyle Larson has this one as a HenderCars.com scheme. I think it looks amazing. It's going to look really good on the racetrack at the Coke 600 next week. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Ankram's 2022 Toyota Susho scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This paint scheme's all right in my opinion. It's cool to see Toyota and Susho are partnering up once again with Tyler Ankram. I don't think they sponsored him in the past, of course, so really awesome to see that, and I'm glad to see that they have this paint scheme for this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is John Hunter Nemechek's 2022 Tom Thumb Albertson scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Really awesome. Albertsons is coming back in the sport. The last time Albertsons has actually sponsored a truck, I think it's been a while. I don't think it's the first time they sponsored in years. So I think his paint scheme looks good. I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Anthony Alfredo's 2022 first fade card scheme that we'll see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This paint scheme does really solid, really awesome in my opinion. Really cool. The first phase is sponsoring Anthony Alfredo, and I think the colors look really good on this car. Looking forward to see on the racetrack at Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brandon Brown's 2022 Brandon Bell Foundation scheme that we'll see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This paint scheme is matte in my opinion. I'm not as big fan of the yellow and the blue colors, and all the other colors just really don't work for me as much as in the past. I think it's okay, but it's not the greatest scheme that I've seen on the racetrack in my honest opinion. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Sheldon Creed's 2022 NLE OMF wheeling scheme that we'll see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Overall, I think this paint scheme does look really great in my opinion. I think it has a lot of good touch, and also LEMF being on the car once again is really awesome. Different sponsorship this weekend, and I'm glad to see it will be on the racetrack this weekend at the Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2022 Guaranteed Rated Update scheme I will see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This is actually different than the other guaranteed rate schemes. Actually got a different looking color, and honestly, this is probably my favorite guaranteed rate scheme that I've seen so far. So I think it does look pretty good, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack in Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Elliott's 2022 Napa Patriotic scheme that we'll see next weekend at the Coke 600. Not a big fan of this paint scheme. Not a big fan. I love it they're doing a different one for this weekend, but I'm not a big fan of the Napa-looking Patriotic scheme. It doesn't look great in my opinion. It's matte in my honest opinion. It doesn't look really good. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Alex Bowman's 2022 Ally Patriotic scheme that we're seeing next weekend at the Coca-Cola 600. Honestly, same thing, very similar to Chase Elliott's. Not as big fan of this one either. And there's a reason for that. The purple on the car. Why can they not change it up and have a blue-looking one instead of purple? Not a big fan of that. I just don't think it looks that great, to be honest with you. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is William Byron's 2022 Liberty University Patriotic scheme we're seeing next weekend at the Coke 600. This one's okay in my opinion. It's probably my favorite one of the three in all honesty. I think it actually does really well. It's very similar to last year's one, which I actually liked that one last year as well. I think it does look really great and a very solid looking one. And probably the second best one that Hendrick Motorsports has had is released so far. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chandler Smith's 2022 iBuyPower scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Chandler Smith's had a lot of different sponsors, and this is another one that's willing to work with him, which I think is really great. I think it was sponsored for 4 or 5 races this season, which I think is really awesome that you have a lot of sponsors willing to be committed, and I think the paint scheme looks pretty good in my honest opinion. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Bubba Wallace's 2022 Dr. Pepper Dark Berry scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. I actually really love this scheme. I think it looks really great. Great to see the Dr. Pepper is partnering up with the new Dark Berry flavor, which is coming out here very soon. This looks really good in my opinion, and I'm very happy to see a Bubba Wallace has a different looking Dr. Pepper scheme. We've seen the cream soda one, we've seen the regular Dr. Pepper scheme, and now we're getting another different version of the Dr. Pepper scheme. I think it looks really sick, really awesome, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing on the racetrack here this weekend. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Davie Siegel. As Davie Siegel revealed that he has joined SIRI XM as next NASCAR as an associate producer of the company. I am very excited Davie Siegel is getting an opportunity to work as an associate producer of Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. Davie Siegel's been working really hard over the last couple years. He's been working in the front stretch group for many years, produces those really awesome TikTok videos, and I think he absolutely deserves this opportunity. Absolutely well deserved. Congratulations, Davie Siegel, on working with Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. I think he's going to do a great job for the company. I think he will help and continue to improve Sirius XM going down the road. I think he's going to do really awesome, and really glad to see and congratulations to him on getting an opportunity to work with Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, I did not talk about this earlier this week, but Bubba Wallace at Kansas had the most green flag passes of anybody in the field with 123 green flag passes. This, of course, due to the fact that Bubba Wallace actually had to drop to the rear multiple times due to multiple pit crew issues, and he still rebounded to a top 10 finish in this race. I think Bubba Wallace is on the verge of having potentially some good runs going forward. If 2311 has pace like Kurt had, I think Bubba Wallace could also really show up. But the pickers got to get their stuff together. And 2311 has a dilemma right now. It's getting that picker situation taken care of and sorted out. If they can fix that picker problem, the picker issues they've had, I think it'll be great for them. And hopefully they can fix those problems because I think that's been a big issue for them. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As this is never really reported by Fox Sports, but I reported this, and a couple other people reported this, that Kyle Busch had the fastest pit stop, a four-tire pit stop, I should say, in NASCAR Cup Series history with an 8.96 second pit stop. Holy crap, the first pit stop under 9 seconds. That is a four-tire pit stop in Cup Series history. Kyle Busch had already broken the fastest pit stop in history, like a 9.1 or 9.2 seconds earlier this year, I think, at Talladega. But now he has the fastest pit stop in Cup Series history under 9 seconds. We knew with these single nuts, it was going to be much more of a potential. We were going to see more of these pit stops being under 10 seconds, but wow. Under 9 seconds. That's absolutely incredible and amazing. And the fact that it happened, I think, is absolutely amazing. So, very awesome to see that for sure. I'm glad to see that they were under 9 seconds. I think that's absolutely incredible and great, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Jeff Gluck poll from this past weekend. Of course, the Jeff Gluck poll always comes out after every single race, and for this week, it got a 90.1% of people saying yes. This is the third time this year that it's been over 90% for the races, and get this, all 3 races that it's been there, whether it be Auto Club Vegas and Kansas, all 3 of those races are intermediate tracks. But one thing is that the intermediate package this year has generally been really awesome and really good. So I think that's why the Jeff Gluck poll, especially for these intermediate races, has been special. And he also said this is the #1 rated Kansas race he's ever done, which shows I think Kansas is in a really good position going forward. So I think that's really awesome, really amazing, and again, very happy to see that the Jeff Gluck poll was very successful for this week. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kurt Busch. As Kurt Busch was on Sirius XM NASCAR radio this past week, and he talked about becoming a role model for the next generation of race car drivers coming up. Kurt Busch, of course, has been in the NASCAR world since around 2000 when he started the NASCAR Camp World Truck Series. Has been racing there since 2000, and it's been racing for 22 plus years, and now is in his mid-40s, and it's him and Kevin Harvick are the longer tenured drivers in the Cup Series. Of course, he's going to be a role model compared to Kevin Harvick, I don't think has really been a role model. Kurt Busch has generally been a role model for younger drivers, and I think it shows one thing. Kurt Busch's maturity has really played a factor in helping out him really over the years, but also I do think another major factor that's been really helping him is his success as a driver and his return and his maturity and growth. And that's one thing a lot of these younger kids are going to have to learn, is that when you do get down, you got to get yourself back up. So I think that's really exciting to see, and again, very happy to see that Kurt Busch has been able to help out in those ways. I think it's great for the sport when he succeeds, and it's great for the sport overall too, in my opinion. Really exciting news for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Timmy Hill. As Timmy Hill is going to be driving the 13th for MBM Motorsports this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Timmy Hill's been driving for MBM Motorsports pretty much most of his career in NASCAR Xfinity Series, and no surprise he's back in the 13 this weekend. Now, I think Timmy Hill is a pretty good driver. The one issue with Timmy Hill is the fact that he is not in a really fast car. So I don't know how well he's going to do it. I don't know if he's going to be able to be as competitive and compete for a good finish at all if he makes the show, because the 13 car, like I said, has to qualify in on time, and of course you have that extra Hendrick injury. So there's going to be one car that is going to be going home in Xfinity, and it's going to come down to Brennan Poole or the 13 organization of getting into the show. So I really hope Timmy Hill can make the show. I think he's got a shot at getting it done. If he does, I would maybe see a decent top 35 run coming. I think that'd be great for them, and I do hope he does come and is able to make the show. We'll wait to see what happens, but I really do hope he gets an opportunity to race, and I think it'd be great, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the AllStar Open. As the AllStar Open start time for the AllStar Open has been moved up to 5:30 p.m. Eastern, so the Blake Shelton concert can move to in between the Open and the main event. Originally, the AllStar Open was supposed to take place at 6 Eastern, so about 2 hours before the Cup Series race was supposed to take place. but they're moving it up a little bit earlier in the event so that we can have the Blake Shelton concert right in between. Very similar to how they did it at the Clash earlier this year when they had the Pitbull concert in between after the heat races and then into the main show. They have the All-Star Open happening right here, and for the basically All-Star Open happening right here, and it'll be happening in between. The Blake Shelton concert probably will attract some people. That's going to be televised on FS1, of course. The All-Star race this weekend is going to be on FS1, and I think it's a great decision overall for the fans who really are going for the Blake Shelton concert, who are not going for the NASCAR Cup Series race. I know a lot of people, though, of course, going to the All-Star race this weekend, which we're going to talk about the All-Star format in the future. But I think it's really, really good, and glad to see that they're doing that for this race. And now we're going to jump to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Indy 500 attendance. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Monday afternoon that IMS is expecting to host slightly over 300,000 people for next Sunday's Indy 500, which would set a new post-pandemic single-day crowd record since the pandemic has happened. And we're not up to where 2016 is right now. We're at 20,000 short of that, but we're expecting a lot of attendance there. This is absolutely huge for Indianapolis 500, being the most attended event. And Indy 500, no surprise, has always probably been one of the highly attended events, and a lot of reasons. Of course, one, we've seen a lot of success with Indy 500 over the last couple years, but also Indy 500 is probably the biggest racing event in the world. I know some people mentioned the Monaco GP, but this event, in my opinion, is much bigger than the Monaco GP. And I think that's why the Indy 500, like I said, has been generally a really, really successful event over the years. And it really is no surprise to me that the Indy 500 is going to probably have a really high attended event. I think that absolutely is amazing, really, really awesome. And like I said, again, I think it's really, really cool to see the Indy 500 is continuing to get huge attendance numbers. I think the success of Indy 500 is really, really good, and hopefully we will see more success from that event going forward. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about F1 and NASCAR for one big reason and one reason only. The two drivers who currently drive for Haas F1, Mick Schumacher and Kevin Magnussen, were in the Charlotte area, and they went to Charlotte Motor Speedway, and they actually drove the 41 car that Cole Custer drove, and they were able to test the 41 car on the high banks of the Charlotte International Speedway. I think that this is something that's a really cool crossover. It's not as big of an event as probably when Tony Stewart Lewis Hamilton crossover, because there's no fans in attendance for that, because that Lewis Hamilton and Tony Stewart crossover in 2011 was such a major and huge event for the world of racing. And I think that's, again, this kind of crossover needs to continue to happen. And having your two drivers, Haas, of course, they currently drive for the Haas F1 organization. I think Kyle Larson mentioned that maybe Kevin Magnussen wants to do some dirt racing and such. I think the fact that Kevin Magnussen and Mick Schumacher were able to go do this, I think is absolutely amazing and absolutely incredible at the same time. I'm not sure what the times are. I didn't really get to watch the video, but I think it's really cool to see that F1 and NASCAR are doing this. It's a great thing, and I'm really excited for sure about this. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Formula 1 and the potential of a replacement for the Russian GP. We haven't really talked much about a potential replacement for the Russian Grand Prix, but it does not look like that there is going to be a replacement race for the Russian Grand Prix, as F1 revealed this meeting that there's going to be 22 races on the F1 schedule instead of 23. Now, initially, there were a couple of potential replacement possibilities for 2022. Of course, one of them was Singapore. I know Singapore had been brought up in the conversation to potentially have a race, but that got unfortunately denied. And then the other race that really got a lot of talking points was Turkey, but I'm not really sure what happened. I think they had a COVID spike or something like that that really played a factor into that, why they couldn't go to Turkey, or they may be having a war that had been going on in Turkey. I'm not entirely sure. But I really am not surprised that they are not replacing the Russian Grand Prix. Again, a lot of people are probably going to be frustrated. I know that there's been rumors Spa's future is in question at the moment. But I will say, basically, I think it is a good decision not to replace it currently at the moment. I think it makes a ton of sense. And overall, I think it is a great decision that they decided to not replace the Russian GP. So there's going to be one less race for 2022, meaning that I believe we only have 17 events now instead of 18 events left to go into championship, meaning one less race to make up, and you don't have as much time to make up in the championship. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ryan Hunter-Reay. As Ryan Hunter-Reay has joined Chip Ganassi Racing in their IMSA development role, and will be basically in the development role for their IMSA program. Ryan Hunter-Reay, of course, I believe the 2012 or 2013 IndyCar Series champion, and a driver who has went on to win many races, not just IndyCar, but in IMSA as well. Now, of course, Ryan Hunter-Reay will be competing in the full IndyCar, full SRX season, and there have been a lot of questions maybe that he be racing in IndyCar in the future, but again, right now he's not planning to race IndyCar at this time. Ryan Hunter-Reay has been, like I said, very, very successful in the world of racing. He's won a lot of big events, including the 2014 Indianapolis 500, but he's been a veteran as well and has driven for Chip Ganassi Racing's IMSA program when Jimmy Johnson was over at the Texas race. I think it makes a ton of sense, right, to bring in Ryan Hunter-Reay in with his experience and his prowess and what he's been able to do behind the wheel over the years. I think it makes absolutely insane amount of sense why they decided to bring Ryan Hunter-Reay over into this car. So, again, I'm very happy to see Ryan Hunter-Reay is going to be in this car. I think he's going to do a really good opportunity to develop these younger kids in IMSA and probably help also help Sebastian Bourdais and so many younger kids in these cars. And I think he will do an amazing and incredible job in this because I think he's a good driver and I think he'll do really, really good in here. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about Andy Lally. As Andy Lally is going to be driving for Alpha Prime Racing in a couple weeks at Portland Raceway. Now, Andy Lally initially was supposed to run 5 or 6 races with Alpha Prime Racing in 2022, but unfortunately, at the time until very recently, he actually had basically broken his contract and said he had a really good opportunity to race in the Cup Series. That opportunity, of course, driving a 78 for Live Fast Motorsports or another good organization. But Andy Lally now has made the decision to go back and race with Alpha Prime Racing at Portland. I'm very excited Andy Lally is going to be driving for Alpha Prime Racing in this season. Yes, Alpha Prime Racing is not the best organization overall, but we've seen Andy Lally get in cars that are very underfunded and really haven't been up to par, up to speed. And he's been able to go out there and be extremely successful and has done an incredible job in these cars. So my expectations for Andy Lally at Portland, I think he's got a shot of outside getting a top 10. I think he honestly could get a top 10 here at Portland Raceway. Yes, there's a lot of road course racers who probably are going to be in the event who are also really good Xfinity Series drivers, but we've seen drivers do extremely well and do a lot of amazing things in these cars. So I am very excited to see that Andy Lally is going to be driving for Alpha Prime Racing. I think he is going to do a very, very splendid and a really, really good job. And like I said, very excited to see that he's going to be driving for Alpha Prime Racing. I think he's going to do an excellent job, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Indy GP TV ratings from this past weekend, and honestly, they're not very good. So, NBC got a 0.6 rating and 998,000 viewers for Saturday's NTT IndyCar race at Indianapolis. That is down from a 0.64 rating and 1.021 million viewers for last year's event. There's a lot of factors that really played a role into this race, because honestly, this race I thought was really, really good. But there's a lot of factors that I think played into a role why this race did not get a huge rating. Number one, IndyCar has been really struggling with their social media game. I think they're behind NASCAR and Formula 1 on their social media game, and that's one thing they absolutely need to work on is a social media thing, which they, of course, are currently working on a documentary. We talked about it earlier this week. They're currently working on a documentary at the moment. But another big reason why I think this weekend that they really struggle is the lack of promotion. They're really right now only promoting the Indianapolis 500 right now, and they're not really putting promotion into their other events. And I think that's one thing that, like I said, IndyCar is kind of struggling on, because I think their TV coverage has absolutely been excellent. I think it's not as good as F1's, but I think their TV coverage has generally been excellent. But like I mentioned here, I think the fact that basically they did not promote this race at all, I think played a major role into their major struggles of getting people to watch and tune into the race. I think if you don't promote your races, of course people are not going to watch. What do you expect? If you don't get any sort of promotion out there, you're not going to have people watch your races, and I think that is a big problem. I think if you promote your races, I think that's going to help your series overall. So I hope in long term they can not have these issues going forward. And again, IndyCar needs to start promoting more of their races out to the general public. I feel their Peacock streaming service has been somewhat successful, but they got to find a way to promote these races going forward. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Money Team Racing. Now, Money Team Racing has only made 2 starts so far in the season. Of course, the Daytona 500 and Circuit of the Americas. And we've been wondering what the next race for the Money Team Racing is going to be. Well, according to NASCAR Room Nostalgia, they reported that their next race that the Money Team is expected to run is going to be at next weekend's Coca-Cola 600, and once again, I believe it is going to be with Kaz Grala as well. Now, the Money Team Racing, of course, is Floyd Mayweather's organization, but it's managed by the Starcom Racing Group. Starcom Racing Group has managed it for the 2 races, and so far in the select starts they've had, I believe they have 1 top 20 finish and 1 finish barely outside of the top 20 currently at the moment, and their expectations generally are not through the roof at the moment, and they're going to a track where speed is going to matter a lot, and I think they're behind the 8 ball on a lot of these organizations, including MY Racing, which I have no clue when their next race is going to be. They haven't raced since, I believe the last time they raced is Talladega. It's been a while since they've raced a couple weeks now, so it's unclear when they're going to race, but I do think the Money Team Racing, naturally speaking, if they can get, because I think they want to run 12 to 15 races, but the fact they've only ran 3 races this year is kind of disappointing. I thought we'd see them at Talladega. I thought we'd see them more races this year, but it's definitely unfortunate they haven't ran more, but maybe they're going to run at the Coke 600, maybe they're going to run a Gateway. Who really knows? But I'm at least glad that they are looking to come back. I just don't know when, if they'll be for sure back, but it looks like they're going to be back at the Coke 600, which I think is generally really, really awesome and great. Hopefully we'll see them we'll see them back in the track here in the near future. And now we're going on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daniel Dye. Now, I forgot to mention this earlier this week, but Daniel Dye has been reinstated by ARCA, and his charges were reduced from felony to a misdemeanor charge. I'm not really going to talk much about the story because if everyone pretty much knows the story about Daniel Dye. Daniel Dye was at a party and basically punched a kid in the groin, and the kid filed charges against Daniel Dye. Daniel Dye had been basically suspended by ARCA, and actually surprisingly did not miss a race. In fact, he actually raced at Kansas and finished in 3rd position, I believe, on the lead lap, and finished just right behind Nick Sanchez, who won the race, and Roger Carew. Daniel Dye's got a lot of potential. The one thing I will say about Daniel Dye is he definitely made a major, major mistake in his career, and people are going to look at him in a very, very bad light. And I don't want to see drivers look in a bad light, but sadly, Daniel Dye is going to get looked at in a very, very negative light going forward. But I will say this when it comes to Daniel Dye. I think he's got a lot of potential to really turn himself around. He's only 18 years old. He does, and they basically said he's getting him back from a game earlier, which again is kind of shocking that he's getting him back from a game earlier in the week. I think it's kind of really crazy that he's getting back for game week and still punch him in the groin, which is kind of, that's something you don't do, men basically don't do, is basically punch people in the groin. But generally and naturally speaking, I think it is good to see that basically he's going to be back in ARCA. I think he's got a lot of talent. The guy's won races in ARCA so far in this year, and ARCA East and such. And I think he's a driver that can be really, really successful. So hope he's learned his lesson from this. He can grow from this. He's 18 years old, so he's got a lot of time to grow. And I hope he doesn't make any mistakes going forward in the future. And now we're going into on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the number 31 team. Now, it was officially reported that the number 31 team's Trent Owens, who's a crew chief, and 2 crew members from the 31 team have been suspended once again for 4 races. They are the first team now to have not only 1 time with their team suspended, but 2 races where they've had 4 race suspensions. And this, of course, coming from Kansas Speedway, where the wheel basically came off and the left rear of the car basically caught on fire for the number 31 organization. And which means, like I said, Trent Owens once again is suspended. Now, it's unclear currently at the moment if they're going to appeal. I would have already expected that they were going to announce an appeal, but it's very obvious and clear that if you have a tire come off and these 4 race suspensions happen, it's never really a good thing. But again, I'm going to say this time and time again. I think the penalties are a little bit harsh. I think the fact that it is a 4-race suspension is a little bit ridiculous. I personally believe that they do need to reduce penalties down to 2-race suspensions. I think, again, a penalty is absolutely needed because these tires, if they roll onto the track, it's going to be really, really dangerous. But I do believe that they need to 100% go ahead and reduce the penalties just a little bit. You don't need to reduce it a lot. You just need to reduce it enough to where it's not a major, major detriment going forward for the 31 team. Again, because when you have it happen, basically what happens here is basically when you lose your crew chief, your good guys, you bring in people that are not as good and less experienced. Now, these guys, of course, come from the Trackhouse organization, so they're being supplied from Trackhouse, meaning that Trackhouse has become a much higher up organization. But at the same token, in the same time, I do hope these penalties long-term get reduced. It needs to change. This is something that it's just becoming a major issue. We know we've had issues with over-tight Lundas, which Eric Jones and his crew basically explained that the top Lundas basically got way too over-tight, and it caused an issue right there. So I think that's overall a pretty cool thing. Not a good thing, but it's good to see that, again, it's not a good thing, basically, that team's been suspended, and hopefully we'll not see these teams, and we'll see some reduction of suspensions going forward in the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about IndyCar and new venues. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that IndyCar is not likely to add a new venue to the schedule in 2023 at the moment, but it's not final per Mark Miles. He continued on by saying, I don't think so when it revolves around Milwaukee Mile. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but more likely than not, it wouldn't be for next season. Now, this is where I'm going to kind of start talking a little bit of a rant here when it comes to the IndyCar schedule. The IndyCar schedule, yes, there's a lot of different variations of tracks. But you know what the IndyCar series is really lacking right now? Ovals. Right now, there's only a few oval tracks that are on the IndyCar schedule. Indianapolis Motor Speedway is kind of its own breed. Then you have Texas Motor Speedway, and then you have Gateway in Iowa, and that's it. You only have 5 oval tracks on the circuit, and it's a no-brainer to me that adding another oval track like the Milwaukee Mile absolutely makes a lot of sense to me. It really is a no-brainer, and I don't really understand why they cannot add a new oval track to the IndyCar schedule. It really doesn't make sense to me. The Milwaukee Mile, again, they don't have enough races on the schedule. It feels like the IndyCar schedule is really short. They're already 5 or 6 races through, so you only have 10 races left, and we know the Toronto's going to be happening, so thank God for that. But I'm just really, really frustrated by the fact that they cannot get a new IndyCar venue on the circuit when they ultimately can. A new IndyCar venue is a no-brainer to me. They should be adding the Milwaukee Mile, or go to Pocono somehow. I don't know, but it needs to be an oval-based track. I don't entirely understand in any shape or form why there cannot be a single new freaking venue on the racetrack. It doesn't make sense to me in any shape or form. I really wish it could change, but honestly, I don't understand why they cannot add a new venue. It needs to change, and I hope going forward they can add a new venues. I think it would be great for IndyCar, and like I said, I hope they can add a new venue going forward into the future. So I think it'd be great, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Dave Moody. Now, Dave Moody basically put out on Twitter his kind of idea of the AFA format, and basically talked about that 24 of the 36 Cup Series cars are going this week and are going to be in the field, meaning 2/3 are going to be in the field. And he basically says that is not really an all-star race. It's basically almost your whole entire field going to be out there. And basically says that for the All-Stars, we should take the top 10 from each series and race them all together, having 30 cars on track. I actually kind of agree with Dave Moody here. And I will say this about the All-Star race here. I have been a fan of the All-Star race really for a long time, but I feel like in the last couple years as well, it's kind of lost its luster. And when you have 2/3 of the field being locked into a race, yeah, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think 2/3 of the field should be locked in. I think the premier drivers in each of the series respectively have been really, really successful. They should all race against each other. And yes, maybe you can have last chance qualifiers, and it may not be fair to the other drivers, but it can be like a multi-class race, or you get next-gen cars out there, preparations from these teams, and let them go out there run. I think it would make a ton more sense for this to be the format going forward, and not just basically have a single race where it's basically just for 24 to 36 cars. It's not fair, in my opinion, that 2/3 of the field is ultimately locked in. There's no reason 2/3 of the Cup Series field should be locked in. And on top of that as well, why don't we just go ahead and rotate the season where this happens along with season finale? Why not rotate where we go for the All-Stars? Texas Motor Speedway is not a great track. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. We have a good race this weekend. But Texas Motor Speedway generally is not a great organization. It's not a great track. And honestly, I think we need to go to different tracks. Maybe like North Wilkesboro, perhaps, if that gets opened up in the future. Who really knows at this point? But I think we do need to consider in the future going to new venues in different areas. And also we need to change the format going forward as well. As I think the format is kind of just, the format's okay, but I think we need to go to different venues, and we need to get rid of having basically 2/3 field locked in the event. I don't think 2/3 of field should be locked in the events overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Kansas TV ratings from this past weekend. It was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that FS1 got a 1.43 rating and 2.337 million viewers for Sunday's Cup Series race at Kansas. This is way down from a 1.62 rating and 2.739 million viewers for last year's event. That is nearly 400,000 less people who watch this event from the past year, and that is not really, really good at all for a lot of reasons. Number one, having that big of a drop-off, that's probably the biggest drop-off since the Daytona 500, and we've generally had flat numbers this year, but the fact that we dropped that much is absolutely really, really concerning for a few reasons. Number one, this race was not marketed. there was a lack of marketing and a lot of promotion. I've seen more promotion for the Coke 600, and really the AllStar race has gotten a lot of promotion too. They have not been going and promoting these Kansas races, and that's one thing Formula One I think does a much better job at, is the promotion. NASCAR has really been bad when it comes to that promotion, and that lack of demographics while NASCAR's having right now, this is a contributing factor, is not promoting and showing these races out to the fans. If you don't promote the races out to them, if you don't go and promote it, you're going to have major issues, and I just don't understand why they cannot go ahead and promote these events more. I think it would make a lot more sense if they just, again, would start promoting these races. I don't understand why they can't promote. It doesn't make sense, and I think it would help the ratings. Just basically what I want to say is they need to start promoting, because if they don't start promoting, it's going to be an issue going forward. So I hope that NASCAR is listening to me, and basically in the future, they can change that and basically go ahead and promote these races more. And by the way, start putting all the races on the main TV networks, Fox and NBC. Not hard to do, not hard to comprehend. Fox and NBC, I hope you're listening going forward in the next TV deal. Get as many races on the main network as possible, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about David Wilson and Le Mans 24 Hours. Now, David Wilson was speaking to the media in regards to a couple things. One was, of course, is Kyle Busch's contract and talking about potential new manufacturers. But one thing that really got me intrigued was his thoughts on what situation was with the Le Mans 24 Hours. He basically says that he was disappointed not to have a heads up on Le Mans in NASCAR announcement. Toyota Ford expressed his pleasure. He says while he's a fan of the deal, he wants it to be fair for everybody involved in regards to Le Mans 24 Hours. Now, I've given my opinion on the situation when it comes to this, but I absolutely 100% agree with David Wilson right here. I think the fact that they really only reached out to Hendrick Motorsports at the time, they really reached out to Hendrick Motorsports and really did not let everybody know, and there was a lack of transparency when it came to that at first. I don't think that really is fair to the other organizations, because it's going to give Hendrick and those teams a little bit more of an advantage. I personally think that they all should be able to have 3 different cars, 1 Chevy, 1 Ford, and 1 Toyota out on the racetrack at once. But it does look like there is at least a slight end of the road right here, at least a slight light at the end of the tunnel for all these manufacturers, as NASCAR apparently is going to let Ford and Toyota be involved with the development of this car, which I think generally makes a ton of sense. Now, right now, it's very unclear at the moment who is going to be in these cars right now. I think the favorites are going to be the Hendrick cars. I think one Hendrick driver that's currently driving, being like a Kyle Larson or Chase Elliott for that matter, is a favorite to get in. We know the Jimmy Johnson driver that's being mentioned, and then, of course, you have Jeff Gordon's also being mentioned as a possibility for this car as well. You've also got other guys like Kamui Kobayashi could be available. Of course, you do have other drivers like Ron Fellows who could be an option. Boris Said could be an option for this car. Who really knows? But back to my original point, there needs to be a transparency, and NASCAR has had an issue, especially very recently, where they've had a lack of transparency. And when you're not transparent with your teams and your fans, it does become an issue, and your manufacturer being frustrated and showing displeasure. I don't really blame them for being frustrated about it. I think the lack of transparency we talk about is Denny Hamlin's lack of transparency. Look, they're obviously, of course, going to go to the best team, but I think you at least need to let the other teams know what's going on and just don't keep this a secret. It really is kind of frustrating that they basically kept the secret and didn't tell any team. They could have at least given a heads up and really didn't. So I'm glad they're now letting the teams get involved in the Le Mans 24-hour project, but I understand the frustration at the same time why those people are frustrated about it, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Kurt Busch and Ashley Busch. And in very shocking fashion, while Kurt Busch is definitely riding a high, he's had a very big low this week, as it was revealed by TMZ and multiple NASCAR reporters that Ashley Busch has filed for divorce. Now, when you look inside the documents that were revealed, it does reveal that it says that their marriage is currently broken. Kurt Busch did release a statement very, very recently, basically saying that it's a private matter. I hope it does become that it's a private matter, and we don't want this really becoming, and we hope that this gets solved between the both of them. Now, I'm not going to react to a lot of the issues and things that were revealed in those documents. You want to go read them on TMZ. I'm going to be very respectful and honest, but man, just hearing that this happened, they filed for divorce, is really, really sad. And there's really a lot of reasons why I feel really, really sad about this. And a big reason, absolutely, of course, is the fact that I think Ashley Busch really helped Kurt Busch mature and become a much better person. They worked together for many, many years. They worked together for 6 or 7 years. And again, they had a great relationship. And really up until very, very recently, when in that article, really, really recently, things kind of went, unfortunately, bad for them. It's just really definitely sad to see that both of them had really things wouldn't go wrong for them. So I think both of them were in a really, really healthy relationship at the time. And Kurt Busch became a pretty good dude and matured over the years. And she really helped him out through that maturity and through the dark times, especially with his old ex and such. I feel for both of them, man. It's really, really sad situation what's happened here, and I'm just gonna leave it this saying, love is something that's really, really tough to get over sometimes, and it's just unfortunate what's happened for both of them. And it's definitely a crazy story, and Kurt Busch basically gave his side, really didn't really give his side, basically this is a private matter, and it's definitely unfortunate, especially the week after Kurt Busch just picked up his first win with 23XI Racing, and a huge win for 23XI. I don't want this win for him to be overshadowed by this situation, and hopefully just going to be kept a private matter, and it's going to be settled between the two of them going forward. So it's definitely really, really sad and frustrating for sure, and again, it's really, really sad to see that both of them have fortunately kind of ended their relationship together. They've been together for such a long time, and again, it's very sad and really, really unfortunate things have really gone wrong for both of them. So definitely sad story for sure, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Drew Dollar versus Billy Venturini. Now, we talked about this earlier on Monday about Drew Dollar and Billy Venturini's situation. In the ARCA race on Saturday, Drew Dollar was battling for the lead against Corey Heim. Corey Heim had led every single lap, and Drew Dollar got really, really loose and went up into the corner, and unfortunately, him and Corey Heim wrecked. Now, Billy Venturini was absolutely livid and was really, really frustrated. Basically said that I understand how David Gillen feels about Drew Dollar basically wrecking your stuff, and basically said that he's a good kid, but he doesn't have talent and he needs to go find something else to do. Drew Dollar basically did initially, he reacted and basically respectfully took responsibility and the blame. But 2 days after this, on Monday, we had the beef between Drew Dollar and Billy Venturini start. Drew Dollar provided some evidence and facts showing that Drew Dollar put out a Billy Venturini stats showing that it took him 14 years to win a race. Now, he basically got raced really, really hard, and I'll discuss that in a second. Billy Venturini came out, responded later, and says it took 2 days to come up with that reply. Who did you employ to give you this comeback? Wow, Billy Venturini with the comeback, I think, of the year so far. And talking about Drew Dollar a lot. I have been really outspoken against Drew Dollar, and Drew Dollar's really not helping himself right here. Drew Dollar basically has been in a series where there's not much talent. The difference between when Billy Venturini having one win in the series compared to Drew Dollar is back when Billy Venturini raced in the series, he had to compete against a lot of really legendary drivers. Bob Strait, I think, was one of them. Frank Kimmel's another one. Tom Hester was in there. Bobby Gerhart. Names I mentioned here, drivers successful. And of course, Cup Series drivers, Xfinity Series drivers, and Truck Series drivers who came in a series and raced. So Billy Venturini raced in a much more difficult series with a lot more development in that and a lot more talent in that series. Drew Dollar is racing in a series now where 4 or 5 guys and 4 or 5 cars are generally really, really competitive every week. And let's not talk about this for a second. Drew Dollar has been racing for a few years now. Look, Drew Dollar came this year really didn't start racing. He was 15 or 16, so he had that lack of development compared to some of these guys that race. But he's been in the best equipment. He drove Venturini, and only has gotten 1 win, and that was a very controversial and kind of a Mickey win too, because the 2 leaders took each other out coming to the white flag in the race between Riley Herbst and Michael Self. And then he took the win there. In the Truck Series last year, he made 8 starts, had 1 top 10 at Daytona, and had a 24.5 average finish and 3 DNFs in the 51 truck. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, 51 truck. He basically was not very successful. Basically, he's already made drivers mad in Xfinity this year with Jeremy Clemens. He got pissed off, and he's pissed off a lot of people, and a lot of owners were really, really pissed off. Steve Carnaz not really thrilled with it as well. He responded as well as a sponsor. And I want to talk about Drew Dollar. It just shows that Drew Dollar is basically being unaware of what's going on. He's basically disrespecting the hard work of the older series. He doesn't understand that basically you can't talk like this to a guy who's had actual success and has been an owner and a championship-winning owner in that series. And Drew Dollar basically drove for him, and basically that bridge hasn't burned. Like I said, though, I think Drew Dollar is the guy that I think he's not a very talented driver. I think he is the worst driver in NASCAR currently at the moment, and I think he generally should not be in a series at all. And I'm sorry to Drew Dollar. You've got a company you can go work for, but man, dude, you need to learn to understand that you don't disrespect someone who actually work hard. And Drew Dollar has no right to talk, man. That guy's wrecked so many cars. I don't see Billy Venturini get wrecking cars. He got wrecked out by a lot of cars, but he got wrecked out. And basically, I feel for Billy Venturini here, and I think Billy Venturini, I'm going to be honest, I love the comeback from him. I think that was a really, really funny comeback. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm glad that Billy Venturini kind of made those slight remarks at Drew Dollars. I think he absolutely deserved it. And honestly, I think it's a good call that he did. Well, not a good call, but I think he's very interested that he basically made a slight remark at Drew Dollar talking about him because he's made come from money. And basically, he's going to be a true test to this sort of racing. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Denny Hamlin and his vouching that Jay McMurray should be on the Fox Sports booth for the rest of this year in the 2023 season. Now, so far for this weekend, the Fox Sports person has not been revealed for this weekend, but Denny Hamlin put out his vouching that Jay McMurray should be in the Fox Sports booth for the rest of the season and going into 2023. Denny Hamlin basically says that Jay McMurray needs to be hired for the rest of the season and 2023 as well, and says that Jay McMurray brings a lot of insight and information into the Fox Sports booth. I 1,000% in vouching that Jay McMurray should be in the Fox booth. I 100% agree with Denny Hamlin here for a lot of reasons. Jay McMurray, probably besides Dale Jr., I think has been generally the best commentator outside of it. Look, I have loved the rotation this year. I've loved a lot of people they've had. Of course, they've had Matt Kenseth, Tony Stewart, Danica Patrick, Jeff Gordon, Bill Elliott, Richard Petty, Bobby Labonte. They've had Darrell Waltrip back in the booth. They've had Larry McReynolds in the booth. But I think of everybody so far, probably outside of Dale Earnhardt Jr., I think Jay McMurray has generally been the best one. Not only is Jay McMurray very, very insightful and analytical, but Jay McMurray also has Kyle a really, really good question and basically asked him a great analytical question. And Kyle gave a really good answer compared to Clint Bowyer, who really didn't give a really good answer. And he was a really good contrast for Clint Bowyer's goofiness. Yes, Jay McMurray had jokes from time to time, but it really tied it back into the broadcast, and he brought a lot of insight into it. And that's one thing I think generally these broadcasts at Fox have generally been missing this year. I think they generally have been missing so far. So I think McMurray would absolutely be a good candidate. Now, I personally think that I would like to see major changes at the Fox Sports booth. Keep Mike Joy up. I think Mike Joy does an amazing job. But bringing the two people that I would like to see outside of Mike Joyce, I think you need to get the analysts cleaned up there before you jump into having your main commentators. Of course, Mike Joy is getting up there in age, and we don't know how much longer Mike Joy is going to be in the sport. First one, of course, is going to be Jamie McMurray. Jay McMurray, like I said, I wanted him actually in the Fox Sports booth really after Jeff Gordon left. I thought he was going to be full-time in 2022. I really thought he was, but he never came through. But at least he was going to be in the booth for one race, and I hope he's in the rest of the season. The other person I really want to see in the Fox Sports booth is going to be Larry Mack. Now, a lot of people bring up and say, well, Larry Mack is not available. He doesn't want to do this. That's not true. Larry McReynolds basically said last year that he is actually open to do broadcasting and wants to actually get back on the road and do more of the TV commentary. He really missed being in the booth. And when we heard him in the booth at Dover, I thought he did a really excellent job as well. And you have that crew chief role as well. So to me, you would have the good commentator basically opened up. You've got a driver analyst and you have a crew chief analyst who both, I think, are the two currently, by the way, work at Fox, by the way. It would have made so much more sense to have them. And no disrespect to Clint Bowyer, I don't think he should be in the booth. Now, you can put Clint Bowyer somewhere else. You could put him as one of the people at the beginning of the race. You could put him in maybe in the Michael Waltrip position and have him in the pre-race stuff, working like Chris Myers and working in that kind of position. But you need to get him out of, I think, the booth. I don't think Clint Bowyer is as analytical, and that's kind of thing that I think NBC's also has a good thing, does a good job. I think you need to take Jeff Burton out of there so you can have the crew chief, driver, and of course, the regular analysts, Rick Allen, Steve Letarte, and Dale Jr. Honestly, I like to see Allen's back so get into the main commentary role right there in the future, but I personally think that is what the commentary booth should be, and I vouch for Denny Hamlin. A lot of people agree with me. Jay McMurray is very good. He knows what he's doing, and I think he's probably one of the best tools they've got at Fox right now. Put him in the booth the rest of the year, please. I'm absolutely vouching that Jay McMurray should be in the Fox Sports booth for the rest of this year and majorly going forward. I hope it happens. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the 10 car and a potential candidate that really came out of nowhere who could be driving the 10 car. Now, Corey LaJoie suggested somebody to go into 10. Now, everybody at this moment thinks currently that Ryan Preece is the clear absolute favorite to go to the 10 car. But Corey LaJoie suggests that John Hunter Nemechek might be actually a favorite to go to the 10 car for Stewart-Haas Racing in 2023. He says that there is a list of guys, because he does this little stage clear thing segment from a Stack of Pennies podcast. He says that there's a list of guys they're going to be looking at. John Hunter, certainly, with as strong as he's been running in the Truck Series, he's going to be a candidate. Now, he does mention the fact that he does have major ties, of course, with Toyota. But there's not really a lot of spots currently at Toyota that are being opened at the moment. Now, this is definitely a major shocker to me because John Nemechek, when I think about him, I've been thinking he's going to go to a third 2311 race cars. I think 2311 is going to expand in 2023. I've been saying this a couple times in my prediction. If you watch my channel for the last few months, you know I've been really thinking that John Hunter is going to make that jump back up to the Cup Series. I really thought it was going to happen in 2022, but we saw that Kirk Busch was the one who really made the jump. But I think John Hunter Nemechek would be an amazing candidate regardless of what team he goes, whether it goes like the Wood Brothers, maybe takes over Harrison Burton, whether he goes Fire Motorsports, takes the 7, or whether he goes to the 10, would be a really good option. But I still think he still has those major ties with Toyota. So Toyota would have to try to keep John Hunter in their organization. But Toyota, we know, has lost a lot of their big development drivers over the years. They've lost a lot of their big names. They've lost guys like Noah Gragson, even Kyle Larson. They've lost their crew chief in roles like Rudy Fiegel. They've lost a lot of big people in their groups, and we know there's a lot of drivers to be a potential candidates. I still think Ryan Preece right now, though, is the current clear favorite to get into the number 10 car. Because he's got that big development role with Stewart-Haas Racing, I still think he is the favorite currently to go to the 10 car. But John Hunter would be a great choice, and regardless, those two would be really good options. Now, of course, basically, who could be really good options other than those two to get into the ride? One of them could be Noah Gragson. Now, Noah Gragson, I suggest, will probably still remain in Chevy's groups. He's been with Chevy now for quite a few years now. But if there's no rides open available and Junior Motorsports doesn't make that jump up the Cup, Noah Gragson could be a great candidate. And honestly, he's really proven himself. He'd be a great candidate to work in a 10 car. What about Eric Jones? Eric Jones is another driver that I think would be a very successful candidate to go to the 10 car. Eric Jones has been really doing a great job with Petty GMS, and of course, we know that he's trying to talk to Petty GMS of returning at the moment. I don't think he's a favorite to go to that ride, but he would be an amazing option to go to the 10 car if that became available, and I think he'd be really successful and jump right in. And then, of course, you have to think about guys in Xfinity like Riley Herbst. I think Riley Herbst would be my least likely option to go into 10. I would like him the least to be in that car, but he does have the funding and the money, and that's one thing the 10 team really is going to need is the funding and money. Now, we know that Smithfield is still working with Tony Stewart's organization in NHRA, but NHRA organization is much different. Overall, to me, I think it really is going to come down to who is going to be the clear option. And I think it will be either Ryan Preece or John Hunter. I think those are going to be two guys that are the favorites going. I'm still leaning more toward Ryan Preece right now because he's part of SHR's developmental role and basically the backup driver for the team. But John Hunter would be absolutely a great opportunity and a great option to have. I think one of those guys would be a really good option. I think John Hunter would be a really big fit for the team. He's been really successful in the Truck Series this year so far. He has 1 win. I know that year's kind of been rocky, but he still is second in regular season in points. And like I mentioned here, I think he would be a great second option to look at to get in the ride going forward. I think he would be successful, and I think maybe what they're thinking is maybe they're going to think maybe keep Ryan Preece in a developmental role, put John Hunter in the 10 car, and maybe they're thinking about instead of having Hailie Deegan get into the 4 car going forward, I think she's going to be in the Truck Series for a very long time. I think they're maybe looking at putting maybe Ryan Preece in the 4 car as a potential possibility as a replacement, and I think it make a lot of sense. Ryan Preece is part of the KHI developmental group, the KHI management group, and he's been part of that group for a while. That's why he's been having KHI sponsors. Of course, like, Hunt Brothers Pizza and Morton Buildings, I believe, are KHI managed sponsors. They would be able to work with them. Now, Ryan Preece doesn't bring as much money as John Hunter would, and John Hunter has Fires Alarm Solutions and other sponsors that have been working. I think Priority or whatever the company is also John Hunter's sponsor. So that would be a sponsor who would be probably willing to work with them as well. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens in regards to who gets into the ride for the 10 car, but I think it's going to come down to John Hunter and Ryan Preece. I think those are the two clear favorites. I still am more than likely thinking Ryan Preece is getting into the ride, but I think there's a very strong possibility John Hunter could also get into the 10 car in 2023. So, anyway, that's today's on NASCAR and motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on pages on the list schedule below over that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. Do you think it's going to be Ryan Preece or John Nemechek who gets into the 10 car in 2023? Let me know in the comments below. And do you agree with Denny Hamlin that Jamie McMurray should be in the Fox Sports booth in 2023? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, I'm not entirely sure what's going to be coming out. I think I'm going to be doing a video around the 16, if we're going to get 16 winners or not, which I think will be a really good video to talk about. And then Friday, we'll probably either have the Truck Series review, or we'll probably have 1 or 2 videos. Keep your notifications on, and then we'll see what happens the rest of the weekend. It's All-Star Race weekend. Got a lot coming out. I'll see you guys then for some more content. Take care, everybody.